Hello, and welcome to Follow Your Curiosity, where we explore the ups and downs of the creative process and how to keep it moving. I'm your host, Nancy Norbeck. I am a writer, singer, improv comedy newbie, science fiction geek, and creativity coach who loves helping right-brained folks get unstuck. I am so excited to be coming to you with interviews and coaching calls to show you the depth and breadth both of creative pursuits and creative people, to give you some insight into their experiences and to inspire you. My guest today is Maria James-Thiaw, a performance poet, playwright, and professor at Central Penn College. She's also a good friend of mine from the MFA program at Goddard College. While I've known Maria for more than a decade, I'd never heard the story behind her work until this podcast gave me an excuse to make that deep dive with her, and I'm excited to share it with you today. And with that, here's my interview with Maria James-Thiaw.
First of all, thank you for talking to me, because I'm so excited to hear what you have to say today.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So I'm curious because I've known you for, more than 10 years now. Doesn't feel like that.
Wow.
I know. But I'm curious to know, like, when did you start writing? How did you start writing?
Well, when I was really, really little, like to the point where I remember sitting on a bearskin rug and looking up at a brown plaid couch. Like, that's how long ago that was. I remember at that time hearing my dad recite his own poetry and seeing him write. And I just decided that when I learned how to make letters, I was going to make them into poems. And I pretty much did. Like, by the time I was 6, I wrote a poem for my class, and when I was 7, a teacher had us make books, and I made mine a poetry book, and it ended up winning an award from Seattle Pacific University.
No way.
The children young writers conference for Seattle Pacific University.
Wow.
So I said, okay, I think I'll keep doing this.
Well, yeah. That's some serious positive reinforcement there.
Yeah.
So what did your dad think? I don't think I realized that he had written poetry. But what did he think when you're sitting there at 7 churning out poems?
He was really, really proud. He had a public access TV show in Seattle where we lived, and he had me on his show. So I was about 7 years old, and he interviewed me and had me read my poem.
How was that for you?
I thought it was fun. It was a learning experience to know where TV came from. Like, it doesn't live in that little box. And and they would say, thousands of people are watching. And I'm like, where? How do they fit in this thing? Like, I don't get it.
I was going to ask if you were overwhelmed, but it sounds like you must not have been.
No, I just thought it was fun. And then later I remember my cousins. I especially remember cousin Kenny, who was a grown-up, and he was like, there's my superstar. So, like, I knew he had seen it, and people had seen it, and I thought that was cool.
That is pretty cool. So did the experience of being on TV change how you thought about writing?
I thought at a very young age that my career would include being a singer, actress, and writer. And I really never veered away from that very much. I decided really young. It's kind of odd, but that was me. And so I realized that it could be a profession, but I didn't know really that. I just didn't know how anything worked. I just knew that I enjoyed doing it, and kept writing and doing the writers conference each year and stuff like that through school, and was really encouraged by my teachers and everything. So kept doing it until about 5th grade. I did not win the Young Writers Conference, and it was a catastrophe. And so I put down the pen for a little while until high school when we moved from, well, middle school. We moved from Seattle to Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
and it was so devastating. I had to write poems again.
I can believe that. I say, as a Pennsylvania native myself, I can believe that. Because that had to have been a serious culture shock for you.
Well, yeah, my dad's like, look at all the mountains. I'm like, what mountains? I've walked hills bigger than that. There's no snow on them. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And not just the landscape either.
Yeah, there was a lot about the landscape, but the people, yeah, I had not. It's Seattle may not have had as many African Americans, but it was diverse. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Vietnamese, Korean, Native American. In Pennsylvania, they thought Native Americans were extinct, like dinosaurs. I was like, what's
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
Like, what have you people done with all the Indians? I was really freaked out by that.
It's funny because having grown up there, my experience in many ways is the opposite. Is finding out that all of this other stuff exists. So I've
Oh,
never really thought about how it would be to come into it from, an urban area, a much more diverse area. But yeah, no, that must have been way more culture shock than I even would have thought of.
yeah, and it's funny because there's some other cultural things like um because of the time period. It was still the 80s, and
Hmm.
so like we didn't get slang as fast. Like the slang came from New York, and being a kid, that matters. So um
Yes.
so like what was cool there and what was cool here was different. And music, we didn't get the music as fast because, yeah, again, it came from the East Coast.
Hmm.
So, and we had some music that was really popular where we were that kids on the East Coast didn't know yet. Um, like the LA Dream Team or Sir Mix-a-Lot, who eventually came over, but
Hmm.
but yeah, it was just really different. And then, I mean, down to like the shape of the trees, or the fact
Hmm.
that winter there was no leaves on the trees, that really freaked me out.
Oh, I can imagine that would have freaked you out.
I thought there would have been a forest fire. Mom's
I
like,
was
no,
just
that's
about to
winter.
say, I met somebody when I was in college who was from, was it Wisconsin? So I was somewhere, I think, upper Midwest, and she said exactly the same thing to me, that she thought that there had been a forest fire. So clearly, there's something about how trees out here look in the winter that seems perfectly normal to us, but if that's not what you're used to, that's amazing. So
Yeah.
how did all of that filter into what you were writing?
I started with a lot of, teen angst, like, oh, I'm alone in a crowd of faceless people. That was a literal line of one.
Hmm.
um, it was more internal, and I would get mad at my parents, as teenagers do. You have
Sure.
to write about that, or fall in love, then fall out of love. So
Right.
it
Every
was,
week, probably.
yes, definitely, a couple times a week. So it was teen angsty,
Hmm.
and um, I think it didn't really get bigger, like um, until college, when I started thinking more outside myself, thinking about issues between people and how men treated women and opportunities and discrimination and all these different things.
Hmm.
issues came to light, and I started writing about those in college.
Yeah, I think when you get to college, everybody suddenly starts to see more than they did before, or see it differently, which, is kind of the point of college. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, did it just seem like a natural thing to you? Did you really think about it, or did it just sort of happen that way? And then one day you were like, wow, look, this is really, really different.
I don't think that I like sat down and intending to write in a certain way. I think it just kind of, this ticks me off, so I'm going to write it.
Fair.
At that point, very pre-MFA, I definitely was just writing on emotion, just writing when the feeling hit me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that, because I've played with a little bit of poetry here and there. I would never, ever call myself a poet, because that's pretty much, it doesn't happen as often as it did, funnily enough, when I was in high school and college. Gee, I wonder why. But every once in a while, it's been quite a while, but every once in a while I do have a moment where it's like, I gotta write this, and it's got to be a poem. It's not anything else. It's got to be a poem. But that's where my stuff comes from, which is also why I generally don't share it with anybody, right or wrong. But yeah. So when you were in college, did you have anybody who was mentoring you that was supportive? Did you have anybody? Did you ever have an experience with somebody who tried to convince you that this was a waste of your time?
I'm not sure.
It's poetry, right? I mean, that's like even worse than saying you want to be a writer is saying I want to be a poet, and everybody just looks at you like, eh?
Yeah, I always felt like my mom, who's much more left-brained, would have rather I put on a suit and ran a corporation or was a lawyer, something like that. I always felt like that she would have really preferred that. But now I feel her full support. So I don't want to put mom down in that. I feel like she fully sees me and accepts me for who I am. But, at first we all have dreams for our kids, and they tend to have their own dreams, those pesky kiddos. So then I had some wonderful mentors at Shippensburg University in Central Pennsylvania who really encouraged me, and that's where I did my first poetry performances, and it really helped deal with issues of bullying, and I feel like I kind of like created anthems for the other kids, for the other girls who were dealing with boys and bullying and other issues that come up, self-esteem. So it really worked for me, and people started calling me an activist. I really love that. So it's like the ladies running the Women's Center and the Multicultural Student Affairs Office, and all of so many African American professionals as well that really, 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 really encouraged me all around campus. And must I say, the president of the university, who was always in my corner, Dr. Setia. He was amazing. So wow. I always felt I loved Shippensburg.
Well, it sounds like you had very good reason to.
They were great. They were great, and I still, whenever I can, go back and read poetry or talk to the students or just experience some of the things they have on campus. I love it.
That's awesome. So how did people calling you an activist change how you felt about what you were doing?
I remember the first time that happened. I was with the woman that ran the Women's Center on campus, and she was introducing me to someone and said, I had been called a student leader before, but she said, this is one of our activists. And I felt so proud when she said that, because I knew what an activist was. My dad was an activist. I was majoring in ethnic studies. I knew about civil rights. I knew what an activist was. So for her to say that was saying that my words meant something, and we're moving, we're active, we're doing something. And so I was very proud when she said that. I never forgot that moment.
Did it change how you wrote?
I think I was already starting to write about issues of equality. I had already been writing that, and I think I just continued. It just kept me going.
Wow. It sounds like it was a surprise to you, though, to be labeled that way, which is interesting.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of myself that way yet, because a lot of times we think of activist as a person, with the picket sign, or at the sit-in, but artists are activists too.
It's a really good point. And I think it gets lost for a lot of people, because I think a lot of people are afraid of that word and afraid of thinking that their art might be political. But really, in a lot of ways, and this could be a whole separate conversation, which maybe we should have someday, I increasingly wonder if it's possible to have art that's not political.
That is an interesting conversation.
Yeah. And as tempting as it is, I think we're going to have to save it. But we can kind of touch on it a little bit. I mean, you talked about how you wanted to act, and obviously, I know that you still combine performance and poetry.
Yes.
Was that something that just occurred to you later on, or was that always something that you thought of as going together?
I'm remembering my first performance, and but I don't remember preparing it. I don't remember. Oh, you're taking me back, Nancy. So
that's my job.
So yeah, I think I never wanted to be boring. A lot of poetry readings are really boring. And I don't know that anybody said you have to deliver it this way. I don't know. I think it was just my style. Like, I wanted people to feel what I was feeling when, feel what I was saying. And so I always put drama into it. And I used to be in plays and everything, and it just seemed to flow together. And I blend music with it too. So one of my poetry performances was me singing, acting, and writing.
Oh man, I wish I could have seen that. But it sounds to me like it wasn't just that you didn't want to be boring, but that you don't want other people to be boring, because you led at least 2, I think, or co-led workshops at Goddard about performance for writers.
Yes, I did. And yes, that's like one of my goals in life, to help people not be boring. I mean, isn't it something you might hear a wonderful, wonderful, amazing writer, and I'll mention someone who's dead so their feelings won't be hurt. Like, how about Langston Hughes? Incredible. Have you heard he sounds like he just sounds terrible reading his own stuff sometimes. It's like, the Negro speaks and whatever. No, seriously, don't be boring. I think that we need to bring poetry alive for the people, for the common person, so that they can feel what we feel, because it comes from the deepest part of us. And to really understand it, they should feel it too.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of people, when you can tell who the writers are in a room when you say, "Oh, so and so is reading at Barnes and Noble," and like the 2 people who say, "Oh, let's go," are obviously the writers, because everybody else is just like, "Are you kidding me? I'd rather go have root canal than listen to somebody read their own stuff." And I think that it is because a lot of us who write, we write for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's us and words on a page or a screen, whichever. And then when we find out that somebody wants us to read, like, oh, I don't know, our entire graduating class at Goddard, and it's like, we have to do what? In order to graduate, you want me to do what for 10 minutes? That's like my entire lifetime. I'm sorry. You want how? No, really, there must be another way. And obviously we all did it. We all managed it. And I think for a lot of people, the workshops that you guys did, which unfortunately I never got to go to, were probably a lifesaver. But I mean, writers don't have a reputation, and poets often don't have a reputation, unless it's a slam, of being anything that qualifies as even just basic entertainment.
Right.
So, there is something not only in the don't be boring, but in the idea that this is your opportunity to really engage with people, including people who may not have heard of you. And, so why would you want to just stand up there and Mary had a little lamb? Why? And yet, I think a lot of us are just so scared because
and people
good
get
God, there are other
sing-songy.
people in that room.
Yeah, and that's true. And so what's funny is in my job now, I teach, one of the classes I teach is human communication, and we do speeches, and one major section of the class is dealing with anxiety, because anxiety can make people just fall into this sing-songy pattern that it's monotone, and every sentence sounds like a question, or
Yeah.
and so we have to try to overcome that and try to feel the words that we're saying. Like, I love practice with Neruda. He has odes to some of the most ridiculous things, some of the most boring things you would ever think of, and just read those poems as if he's talking about, like sex with an angel or something. Like, he has a poem, ode to socks. I mean, it's not just socks, it's socks. It's just like so awesome. The socks. You have to make us feel how wonderful those socks are.
Yeah. And they must be pretty wonderful socks, because somebody bothered to write a poem about them.
Exactly.
So, in the vein a little bit of the whole, is it possible to make art that's not political? I was hoping that you could tell us about your play called Reclaiming My Time.
Mm-hmm. Well, Reclaiming My Time is a choreopoem, which is a play that is written in poetic form. And our cast, the original cast, had 12 women. And basically how the script came about, I talked to women over 65 years old about their memories of the civil rights movement. Sometimes not necessarily just the movement, but that era, that time period. So some were activists, but more were not. There were women that were children at the time, women that were in interracial relationships, moms, there's just many different stories there. I collected those stories, and the women were some were African American, some were white, some were Jewish, Christian. So there was diversity there. And then I wrote their stories into poems, and then tied those poems together with a theme of kind of looking at the past to help inform what's happening right now. And persisting as we move into the future. So it was really, really successful. We had our our first run had 4 sold out shows, and then we opened up 2 more shows, and those sold out very early as well. And we were able to really touch a lot of people in the community, including a lot of kids, which made me really happy.
That's great. Do you have any plans to take it beyond? You did it at Central Penn, right?
Yeah, we did it at Central Penn College. The Capital Blue Cross Theater, and the director is Janet Bixler. And we are working together to create a nonprofit organization called Reclaim Artist Collective. And through that organization, Reclaiming My Time will be one of the signature programs. So we'll be able to get the funding we need to be able to pay everyone and hit the road. And in addition, do some programming at schools and in communities where we can help empower students to be able to gather stories and translate those stories into poetry. And those stories could be civil rights stories, or maybe they're about gun control, March for Our Lives. Maybe they're about the Women's March. You know, there's many different, maybe a veteran story. It could be so many different areas that we could look into, but how do we translate that into poetry and then touch people through performance? So we're going to be putting on programs and doing our thing.
That is fantastic.
Thank you.
No, I really love that you're taking it that way. And I hope that, that you end up taking it everywhere. I'm actually just sitting here thinking, I met somebody a couple weeks ago that probably would be really interested, and you should meet up. I'll tell you about that later.
Okay. One of our clairvoyant friends says that she sees herself running the southern wing of our organization.
Well, I
I was like, didn't know there was a southern wing. I don't know if that was a application or clairvoyance. I'm not sure.
Could be either. So I know you've already talked about the effects of moving from Seattle to Pennsylvania, but I'm wondering if there are other ways that you've noticed that travel or a sense of place has influenced your work.
Oh, very much. I love to travel, and I feel like the universe talks to me every time I do. So there's something more coming out of the trip all the time. Mm-hmm. And I was able to go to France twice with the VCCA, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. They had a wonderful, wonderful poetry workshop called O Taste and See, and O Taste and See, Writing the Senses in Deep France. And it was led by Marilyn Callett, who is an amazing writer, just retired from University of Tennessee. She's got 16 books under her belt. I don't know how many Pulitzer nominations. And she's just fantastic. And she really helped us see the poetry in everything. So we went to the market and wrote about cheese, bread. Like, there was poetry in everything, in the smells, in everything you taste, in the wine, in the rooster that would not stop waking us up in the morning. It was everywhere. I wrote one about cotton. This cotton just kept floating through the air and everywhere, and it's like killing your sinuses, but there was something about it almost had a personality, and you just wonder, how far can it really travel, and where does it go? And then one day we drove through this forest area, and there was cotton all over the ground, and I was like, oh, this is their meeting place. And so that became a whole story, So just just being in that environment was so inspiring. And I wrote a lot about that. And at one point, my love for Langston Hughes, I was traveling around and I wrote a lot of Langston Hughes poems everywhere I went, to Harlem and 125th Street in Harlem and different places. And then I went to Paris. I wrote about Langston there because he lived there for a while. So I really think I really get inspired because poetry is painting a picture with words, and you can paint a moment and make it so vivid and clear that people smell it, taste it, touch it. And I think that's really important. It's like you're an impressionist, but with words.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what I love about reading poetry and attempting to write my own. Because it does, you do interact with words in a very different way in a poem than you do anywhere else.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I mean, the closest you could probably come is a song, but in a song you've got to you have all sorts of other things you're worrying about too. But yeah, there's something about a poem, especially the right poem at the right time.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So we just have a couple minutes, unfortunately, but yeah. I'm wondering if you had a piece of advice for somebody who wanted to get into writing poetry or maybe writing a play or anything like that, what would it be?
People need to read. Too many times I see people and that perform like they read at a poetry reading, but they've never heard of a lot of the great poets that are out there. They need to read because, as Elena Georgiou at Goddard told us, books are your teachers. So you really can get a better sense of how language is used and formed and some of the techniques and the artistry of it by reading and experiencing poetry. And then you can go out and publish and send it out into the world. But if you haven't done that yet, you haven't done the work, don't put it out there. Don't put it out there till it's ready. I think, it's so easy to publish now, and but sometimes we get this idea, the Spirit just dropped this in my lap, hallelujah. And no, the Spirit wanted you to revise that when it's edit some things. So
yes, it did.
So I think people
hurting the Spirit.
Yes. Practice makes perfect, but continue to read, continue to go out to poetry readings. If you're too scared to read, just listen, but just be a part of a writing community and then put it out there for us to see when it's ready.
Fabulous. Well, I think that is a great place to stop, but I think we're probably going to talk again.
Sounds good to me.
So thank you so much for talking to me today, though.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
That's today's episode. Thanks so much for joining me, and thanks again to Maria James-Thiaw. Maria and I are definitely planning a second conversation about the intersection of art and politics, so stay tuned. You can find show notes and learn more about how you can work with me to follow your curiosity at fycuriosity.com. I'd also love for you to join the conversation on Instagram. You'll find me at fycuriosity. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. See you next time.